let's talk about some basics.
I've been sick this week and haven't had a ton of time to make a video, so let's do another basic thing, and as basic as it comes, store-bought pasta and store-bought sauce. How do you use some technical things to make this the best pasta possible? Of course, we'll make more complicated pastas in the future, but for now, this is just Pasta 101.
So the first part of this is buying pasta. Obviously, pasta is not very expensive, but if you can buy pasta that's a little bit more expensive, it's gonna make a huge difference. If the package says bronze cut or slow dried, those are good indicators, but also if everything's written in Italian and covered up by English, that's also a pretty good sign. But the look of the pasta is also a really easy indicator, so when you look through that little plastic window or take it out of the package, you're looking for the right texture. Cheaper pasta usually is just kind of shiny and smooth, while this nicer pasta looks a little bit rough around the edges, looks like it still has flour on it, and that's going to make a pretty big difference when it comes to how the pasta interacts with the sauce. Now that we have our pasta picked out, let's talk about how it's going to be cooked. So it always is going to have some instructions, and this one specifically says 6 liters of water for 11 to 12 minutes. Let's start out with that 6 liters. So I don't actually measure out my water, as most people don't, but there's a couple of basic things here, like because I'm using a smaller noodle, I can use a shorter pot like this. If I was using a longer thing like spaghetti, I'd probably want to use a taller pot of water. Really, you want to just make sure that your pasta gets submerged as quickly as possible and isn't super overcrowded while it cooks. You gotta add salt to your pasta water, and I'm not talking about just like the tiniest pinch of salt, but at least a couple of big pinches full of salt is really gonna help season the sauce and the pasta throughout. If you're eating your pasta with a particularly salty sauce, you might want to hold back a little bit, but still make sure that it's nice and salted. So back to the amount of water that you're using. Obviously, if you have a huge amount of water, it's gonna take longer to boil. That could be a reason for adding less water, but more importantly, it's going to keep the water nice and concentrated, which will help with our sauce later. It is really important that that water comes up to a rapid boil, because when you add your pasta in, it's going to drop the temperature of the water, and you want it to stay as hot as possible. If your water's not hot enough, or if you don't have enough water, it is going to affect the cook time a little bit. It might take longer, and as soon as it gets in the water, you want to make sure to go ahead and stir that pasta so that nothing sticks together and everybody cooks individually. Now that I'm a few minutes into this, I'm gonna go throw this on my actual stovetop so that I can work the sauce here, because I don't really have the best camera setup. Alright, so that's going over there. Let's talk about sauce. For the sake of keeping this basic, I'm gonna use a jarred sauce, but to be ironic, I'm gonna use the fanciest jarred sauce I can find. How much sauce you use is totally up to you, and obviously it's going to vary significantly depending on how much pasta you have. Just remember, you can always add more sauce to this if you need to. And here's my big takeaway of something that isn't super intuitive but makes a huge difference, and that is finishing the pasta in the pan in the sauce with some of our pasta water. You see how that water is nice and opaque and cloudy? That's all starch from the pasta, which we're gonna have more of, 1, by having a little bit less water, and 2, by using that nicer pasta. This is all gonna make a little bit more sense later, but you're now gonna thin out that sauce with the pasta water. Having that starchy water compared to just like tap water is going to help thicken up the sauce and make sure that the sauce actually adheres to the pasta while it cooks in the sauce. And because we're finishing the pasta in the pan, the sauce is going to reduce a little bit, so that's one of the reasons why we want to thin it out. So that means instead of cooking the pasta all the way through in the water, I'm going to pull it a little bit early and transfer it over to the pan. If you're making pasta for a lot of people, you might need to do this in a much bigger pan or work it in batches. Make sure you didn't add too much pasta water before, because this is also going to bring some pasta water with it when you transfer it over to the pan. Once it's in the pan, go ahead and stir it around. What a catch! Give it a swirly motion, maybe a couple of flips and another swirl. And you can already see that the sauce is starting to really adhere to the pasta. It's starting to thicken up a bit, and it's all coming together to make this really nice combination of sauce and pasta. And now that things are really starting to look like how I want them to, and the sauce is nice and thick how I think it should be, I'm going to go ahead and taste it and make sure that it's done. If it needs another minute or two, you can add a touch more pasta water and let it re-thicken, but in this case, I think it's done. And so it might take a little bit more time and effort, but that pasta is done and absolutely beautiful. I'm just gonna finish it off with a little bit of Parmesan cheese and maybe some fresh basil, and that's about as perfect of a store-bought pasta as you can make.
I know this isn't rocket science, but hopefully it was somewhat interesting. Maybe you learned a couple of techniques here or there. And of course, there will be much more interesting pasta videos in the future, but for now, I hope you like this one. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.